Welcome to the What's New in Forecast Pro version 5. In this lesson, we're going to look at the new and improved exception reports. So what's new in version 5? Well, what we've done between version 4 and version 5 is refine the exception reports to give you more flexibility. The biggest change is we now allow you to compare information not just for the current forecast that Forecast Pro produced, but also any external information you've brought in or any calculated rows that you've generated. This gives you ability to find exceptions against not just our standard forecasts, but any other additional outside information. In addition, we've also allowed you to customize the views quite a bit more than before. So you can actually turn on or off specific pieces of information that you want to see. And we've refined the controls that allow you to set up these customizations. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in Forecast Pro. What I'm showing here is our standard auto parts example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the 6 exception reports that are available to you. Now, just as before, we still have 6, although we've completely changed what the 6 exception reports are. The easiest way to visualize this is to look at both the exception report and compare it to the override grid itself. This is how I tend to think of it visually. So I'm going to use the override grid to give you an example of how this information looks. So let's go ahead and look at the first of the 6 exception reports. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and right-click and choose Exception Report Settings. What you will see is we still have 6 different exception reports. However, what you'll notice is that they have been relabeled to be a little bit more clear what they're doing. And each of the controls within the dialog box have been improved to make it easier to pick what you want to do. The first is the forecast versus history, and this is similar to what we defaulted to in version 4. What you can see is we have different controls now. It defaults to showing you to compare your forecast to the same time last year, and that's the default. And we can compare our forecast itself, or we could compare the baseline or the statistical. If we wanted to, we could customize this to say, instead of looking at last year, maybe we want to look at last quarter, so 3 months ago. Although I think usually most people will stick with the 12 months. You can also do user-defined periods. In addition to showing you what months we're looking at, we also show you the range of information, both dates as well as numerically. And we can do it on a month-by-month basis or cumulative. What you'll notice is that the Show All button is now gone. We now show information across all items. You'll also see that we can turn on the unit deviation and the percent deviation. Before, they were always turned on by default, but you can choose to turn one or both on or off. And instead of showing the baseline, the statistical, and the forecast at all times, you can choose to show 1, 2, or all 3 at once. So you have much more control in this information. So I'm going to go ahead and just do same as last year for the entire periods. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and say OK. Now that I see the report, if I go to this first item here, what you can see is it says my January 2018 forecast is for 19,837, which is this right here. The same time last year is 14,904. You can see in the override grid, here's last year's history. You can see the unit deviation and the percent deviation. And what I could do is I could sort this, largest to smallest, absolute value, to see the largest unit deviations per item. And I can go down my list and review. Now let's take a look at the second exception report. So again, we'll go back to Exception Report Settings. Our second is our forecast versus custom. This is one of our new reports. What this allows us to do is say, I want to compare my forecast that Forecast Pro produced against some sort of custom information. And basically what I can do is I can choose any row in the override grid to compare my forecast against. So what I've loaded in here is, you can see down here below, my customer forecast. So I'm going to look at my forecast versus my customer forecast. This is an external forecast that I brought in myself. And I can look at all periods, or I'm just going to look at the next 3 months. So June, July, and August forecasts that Forecast Pro produced compared to the June, July, and forecast that my customer provided for me. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And this report gets made, and you can see I have for my June, July, and August, I have Forecast Pro's forecast, my customer forecast, the unit deviation and the percent deviation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and sort this again by unit deviation. And what we can see is here's where there's the biggest gap. So for July, Forecast Pro's forecast is for 9,400 units. My customer provided me a forecast of only 1,000 units. You can see that's a difference of 8,400 units, or almost 90%. And what I'm doing is comparing Forecast Pros to this external row. We can do it to external rows, to calculated rows, to conversion rows. And you can do it for multiple rows if you would like as well. So this is a really new feature that's coming in that allows us to compare our forecast that Forecast Pro produced to some sort of outside source. And this is new within version 5. So now let's go ahead and take a look at our next exception report, which is what we've relabeled as forecast accuracy. The forecast accuracy is what most people would consider, we used to call the archive versus actual one. It was by far the most used. This allows us to compare our forecast to a forecast that we produced at a different point in time, and we can pick the lead time. So for example, if I set this to 1, what this will allow me to do is I'll go ahead and say OK. And I have this row turned on in my override. So I'm going to switch this to time series so I can see it. So here's my forecast from last month. Here's my forecast I generated 2 months ago, and here's my forecast I generated 3 months ago. So what I'm doing is I'm comparing my forecast for May. So May's actual came in. If I look at this first item here, came in at 10,000 units. The forecast for May last month was for 2,600 units, a difference of 7,300 units, or about 73%. And I can do this for any lead time. So I basically pick which of these previous forecast rows I want to compare. I also have the ability to come in here and pick what months of history. Do I want this to be May? I could also do it through April and May. I can do it through March, April, and May. So I can control what months of history I want to compare. Okay, moving on, our fourth exception report is our history versus the custom. In this case, what we can do is we can actually measure our history against some outside source if we wanted to. And this can be things like our previous forecasts. It can also be our customer forecasts if we wanted to. So we can actually come in here and basically say, with this one, I'm actually going to do my previous forecasts from 3 months ago. Go ahead and say OK. And this says I want to compare my history to the previous forecast. Now, my customer forecast doesn't go into the past, but if it did, I can compare my customer forecast accuracy against Forecast Pro's accuracy against what actually happened. And this would allow me to look at, here's my forecast, here's my customer's forecast, here's what actually happened, who performed best. And this would be a very, very useful report to see. Moving on to our fifth exception report, which is our forecast versus our previous forecast. Very similar to what we were just looking at. But it's what if I wanted to compare my current forecast to, say, what I did last month. What this basically looks at is here's my current forecast for June, July, and August. Here's what I said last month for June, July, and August. Where is there a very large difference? And this is to answer the question, our forecast is fine as long as it doesn't change very much from month to month. And that's why we would look at this report. And then our final exception report is our waterfall report. And this is very similar to what we used previously in version 4. I'll give you more of the ability to change what information is actually displayed here. But the report itself looks very similar to the reports that we used to see in Forecast Pro version 4, where we have our lead time and basically all the information from the waterfall report transposed into a row instead of a column. So what I wanted to highlight here are some of the new features. You have much more customization. You have the ability to control what's shown. And we have these new ability to compare against outside sources or calculated rows.